On Monday, January 10th, 2025, Meta announced it was cutting 3,600 jobs, about 5% of its workforce. But these weren't your typical layoffs. Unlike the 21,000 positions eliminated between 2022 and 2023, or the silent reductions in 2024, this time Meta claimed these were performance-based cuts. But let me be clear, that's a lie. Internal guidance from Meta's Director of People Experience, Hillary Champion, gave managers a loophole. They could include high performers in these cuts if they couldn't meet their reduction targets. And when you look at who was actually laid off, the common thread wasn't underperformance.
What are you gonna fire me?
No, I already fired you!
It was things like taking medical leave, paternal leave, or advocating for LGBTQ rights. And the data backs this up. A quick look at Reddit, Blind, or LinkedIn shows hundreds of employees with stellar performance reviews, some even on track for promotions, suddenly cut loose. My argument to you is simple. These aren't performance cuts. Zuck isn't simply trimming the fat. He's trimming everything he doesn't like. And this is a broader shift happening across tech. Companies are aligning with the new Trump administration, sidestepping worker protection laws like WARN, and bringing back a ruthless corporate mindset we haven't seen since the days of Jack Welch. And if you don't know who Jack Welch is, don't worry, we're about to dive right in. But before we do, let's get one thing clear. If there's anyone who is barely meeting expectations, it's Zuck, whose bet on the metaverse is still bleeding $13.7 billion a year. Welcome back to Tech Unmasked, a series where I break down the biggest trends in tech and expose what is really happening behind the scenes. I'm your host, Naman Kapoor, a senior software engineer at LinkedIn. And if you want more real story-based videos, make sure to follow me on Instagram where we're dropping a ton of fresh content. If you want me to keep making videos like this, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We've already covered the death of tech's golden era, how software engineers are treated like garbage, and today we're gonna expose Meta's fake performance-based cuts. My interest in this topic began when I came across a LinkedIn post by Joshua Lee, a data scientist at Meta. In his own words, he says, "Well, it seems I'm one of the low performers, with my time at Meta coming to an end just shy of 5 years. Despite performance ratings of exceeds, to greatly exceeds in a promotion, exceeds, a leave of absence in H1 24, and now fiscal year 24 meets most." He goes on to share screenshots of his performance summary cycle, proving that his past ratings were extremely strong. Yet after cycling through 4 managers in 6 months, the 2 people who reviewed him this cycle had been on the team for less than 6 weeks. They conducted no one-on-one meetings, asked 0 clarifying questions, and still rated him at meets most expectations, the lowest rating of his career. Now, Joshua's story isn't out of the ordinary. In fact, we're going to be covering many more stories just like his. But first, let's break down how Meta legally pulled off these cuts without calling them layoffs. And the answer is in plain sight by weaponizing performance reviews. You see, Meta's rating system forces managers to rank employees on a curve. And here you can see the bottom 10% are automatically labeled as underperformers. In the past, Meta managed out these employees over the course of a year, but more recently, Zuck is accelerating the process. The most important thing to remember, the only thing that matters is what's documented in writing. And historical performance doesn't matter. If you aren't absolutely crushing it right now, you'll be let go. My manager kept telling me I was doing great. There were no warnings, no areas for improvement, and then suddenly I was cut. Now, not to scare you, but if your boss is telling you you're doing great, maybe don't trust them 100%. In fact, many of Meta's performance cuts were employees who had never even been warned once.
How about now? You still wired in?
Managers were actively reassuring employees right up until they were fired. And even though most contracts in the United States are at will, companies still have to avoid lawsuits by not firing people for discriminatory reasons like age, race, pregnancy, or medical leave. That's why companies like Meta make sure the paper trail supports the firing decision, even if it doesn't match reality. But Meta isn't alone. This isn't about performance, it's about control. Netflix has its keeper test. If a manager wouldn't fight to keep you, you're out. And Amazon forces 5 to 6% of employees to leave the company every year, regardless of performance. Big tech is converging towards one playbook. Fire employees under the guise of performance and then just hire them back for cheaper. Meta is just following in Amazon's footsteps, and the rest of Silicon Valley is just watching from a distance to see if they can get away with it too. And say what you will about Zuck, at least he's consistent. In fact, he's been telling us exactly what he's going to be doing for a couple years now. In 2023, Meta gave thousands of employees poor performance reviews and asked managers to stack rank their direct reports. And then they simply rehired for those roles for less pay. So Meta is just the new Amazon, setting a precedent that the rest of big tech is watching closely and will likely follow. Even at LinkedIn, we joke, we just do what the other tech companies do 1 year later. Let's hope that's not the case for this one.
A few weeks ago, I got laid off.
And really surprising to at least me, Microsoft just announced performance-based cuts. This is the company that you could go to and retire. Even they're firing people. people. So let's be clear, this isn't about weeding out underperformers. It's about reinforcing control, keeping employees on edge, and ensuring total compliance in an industry where employee protection laws are already thin. If all this sounds familiar, it's because we've already seen it before. The idea of firing the bottom 10% every year, flattening management hierarchies, and rehiring for lower pay isn't new. It's corporate America's favorite playbook, and it was written decades ago by a man named Jack Welch. Welch became the CEO of General Electric in 1981 and immediately set out to make the company more efficient. His speech titled "Growing Fast in a Slow Economy" is widely considered the birth of the shareholder value movement, a philosophy that prioritizes stock prices over workers. To eliminate inefficiencies, Welch shut down underperforming divisions, closed factories, and laid off thousands of employees. But his most controversial move was introducing rank and yank, a system where the bottom 10% of employees were fired every year, no matter how well they performed. Meanwhile, the top 20% were rewarded with bonuses and stock options. Welch also collapsed GE's 9-layer management structure and expanded the stock option program to nearly a third of the company. His leadership style was brutal. He made surprise visits to GE offices and demanded absolute loyalty. If all this sounds familiar, it's because it's exactly what big tech companies are doing today. They're gutting middle management, handing out bonuses to top performers, and firing and rehiring employees to lower costs, all while pretending it's all about performance. Jack Welch would be proud. Decades later, his playbook has found a home in Silicon Valley. Now, with the current state of politics, we also cannot ignore the Trump administration's role in all of this. Ever since Elon Musk's rise and the growing tech-centered oligarchy in the United States, the influence of political power on corporate America cannot be ignored. If you haven't been following closely, Trump took office with the broad mandate of consolidating power and expanding the presidency's reach. His strategy is simple: demand absolute loyalty, fire anyone who steps out of line, and tighten control over every agency. And that's exactly why tech companies are following in line. Meta, along with every other major tech company, knows that pushing back means potentially losing out on billions in federal funding and government contracts. So Zuck's recent moves align perfectly with an effort to improve relations with President-elect Donald Trump. He attended Trump's inauguration alongside other tech billionaires like Jeff Bezos, Sundar Pichai, and Elon Musk. And it doesn't stop there. Meta recently reversed its moderation policies, citing a shift in public perception about free speech.
So I want to make sure that people can share their beliefs and experiences on our platforms.
A move that speaks volumes about where the company's priorities lie. Meanwhile, Zuck went on Joe Rogan's podcast ranting for over 3 hours about how tech companies need more masculine energy. Before we continue, let me introduce you to Qodo Gen 1.0. If you're a developer looking to streamline your workflow with AI, Qodo Gen is the IDE plugin you need. It integrates intelligent coding agents right into your editor, helping you write, refactor, debug, and test code faster, without sacrificing quality. With agentic chat, Qodo Gen doesn't just generate one-shot AI responses. It proactively asks questions, makes decisions, and executes tasks to help you solve complex coding problems step by step. Whether you're generating an API, fixing bugs, or writing tests, Qodo Gen has your back. It works seamlessly with VS Code and JetBrains, and you can install the pre-release today. Check out Qodo using my special link in the description. Now, back to the video. At this point, it should be crystal clear. Meta's recent mass firings disproportionately affected employees who supported DEI initiatives, LGBTQ+ advocacy, and internal discourse around ethics. This isn't coincidence, it's retaliation. Here's a perfect example. This wasn't about performance. It was about workforce reduction in favor of AI initiatives. I frequently asked for feedback and was always told I was doing a good job. I simply put in the work, often on weekends while being isolated in an empty office. Perhaps I became too vocal when our shift to young adult content involved removing safeguards that protect LGBTQ+ users. Maybe I lacked masculine energy, to quote Mark Zuckerberg himself. Who knows? So, was this about performance? No. This was about control. It was about gutting internal dissent. It was about creating a workplace where questioning leadership means losing your job. By now, we've seen how Meta's performance cuts mirror corporate America's most ruthless strategies. But let's talk about how they pulled this off legally, because this wasn't just about layoffs. It was about dodging accountability. One of the only real protections American workers have is the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act of 1988. It requires companies with 100+ employees to provide at least 60 days notice before mass layoffs. For the past few years, tech layoffs have mostly complied with WARN, but Meta's recent performance-based cuts seem like a deliberate effort to sidestep it. After checking out some internal documents, it's clear that they carefully reference WARN requirements, but then never actually mention that this is a WARN filing. In New York City, at least, employees were placed on garden leave for exactly 60 days, just long enough to match WARN's notice period. But so far, Meta hasn't filed a WARN notice. If they get away with this, it sets a very dangerous precedent. Companies will know that they can fire entire departments overnight as long as they mention it was because of performance. And if they can disguise disguise this behind layoffs, they can target whoever they want. Employees on leave, older workers, people take time off, all labeled low performers. Now, some might argue that at least Meta gave really generous severance, while companies like Microsoft gave nothing. But this isn't about severance, it's about precedent. Tesla tried to dodge warrant filings and they got sued. That's how you keep your employers accountable, because if you give them an inch, I promise you they'll take a mile. At this point, I hope you understand what is really happening, but read this testimony from a woman who was recently laid off by Meta. Unfortunately, due to performance, your employment is being terminated based on your 2024 rating on leave. That was the email she received while feeding her baby breakfast. She had spent most of the past year on medical leave and had just returned to work. She knew that her rating would be on leave because she wasn't actively working. And yet when the layoffs came, that was her performance rating. She thought on leave would be immune. There's no performance. She wasn't fired despite being on leave. She was fired because of it. So yeah, tell me how this is about performance again? You can't.